Welcome to the For Everyday Leaders podcast. Brandon Faust here with you today. Alex is not with us hosting today, but so you're stuck with me. But this podcast, the For Everyday Leaders podcast, is all about helping people lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life. And today we have with us Greg Enas. Now, Greg was previously a senior director at Eli Lilly and Co, is the vice chair at Chorus Inc., venture catalyst at Innovative, served as the president of the Trinity Fellows Academy, founding board chair at the Oaks Academy, involved with the Harrison Center of the Arts for the Arts over the years. It was also a board member there. Involved at Redeemer Presbyterian downtown, involved in leadership with the Praxis Guild here in Indianapolis, serving Redemptive entrepreneurs. Helped to launch Citizen 7, which has connected well over 300 men in a broader community for good. Launched with others just recently, Co-Hatch Polk Stables downtown. And I could go on and on and on. But Greg, welcome, and thank you for joining the show.
Thank you, Brandon. It's great to be here in your beautiful space here on Main Street in Brownsburg.
Thank you. Greg, we were actually on a Zoom call a few years ago, talking through some consulting work possibilities based on a group I was working with and a group you were working with. And then we got to know each other a little bit better as we went out for coffee, I think in 2022. And that's now a couple years ago, which is crazy in the blink of an eye. But we kind of stayed connected. I kind of got connected with some of the things with Praxis and Citizen 7, learned more about you through some friends of mine like Brian Shutt and others, and have gotten to grow a friendship with you and others through what's going on with Praxis here locally. And so thank you for, one, coming on. Two, you, as we mentioned in your introduction, you've got a lot always going and spinning, which I love about you. And if anybody knows anything about Greg, you know that Greg knows everybody and that everybody knows each other because of Greg. And so thank you for serving in that role in my life of pouring into me, directly, but also indirectly through connections with others. I've really appreciated that.
Well, you're very welcome, Brandon. I look forward to the journey ahead with you and friendship ahead.
Thank you. Well, let's go on a journey. I know about, the laundry list of some of the things you've been involved with. I've gotten to know you over the last, year and a half or so. But I don't know much about where you grew up or how you grew up. So tell us a little bit about where Greg Enas grew up. What was life like for you growing up? I have not heard this part, so I'm curious just as anybody.
Well, thankfully, today I'm 68 and feeling great, so that means I was born in the 50s, 1956, in Berkeley, California. And so that led into the wild 60s, right there in the hub of free love, free sex, black power, anti-Vietnam War protests, free speech, the whole 9 yards, and I was right in the middle of that growing up. My dad was a lab technician at Shell Oil Development. They had a little R&D site there in the Bay Area. And at age 16, when I was a sophomore at Berkeley High School, he was transferred to Modesto, California, which is one of the gateways to Yosemite. And so the last 2 years of my high school career were in Modesto, where I graduated and then went to college at Biola University, a Christian university in Southern California, and then took my PhD in biostatistics at the Medical College of Virginia. Wow. And upon which Eli Lilly recruited me in 1982. So here I come as a unmarried California native to Indianapolis, basically sight unseen, but God brought me here, fell in love with the place, fell in love with my wife of 38 years, almost. Amazing. She's from Bloomington. Okay. And but the real foundation for my life was growing up in a Christian home. My mom and dad loved Jesus there in Berkeley. They loved each other, and they loved me and my 5 younger siblings. I'm the oldest of 6. And my maternal grandmother lived with us my entire growing up, 18 years. And so there was intergenerational, godly love and care, not only within the family, but my home was the place for all the kids in the neighborhood to come and receive the love, especially from my mom as she stayed at home with us.
Oh, I love that. Well, how did you, in that beautiful environment that you just shared of growing up in, and, and those are things right now as a family that we're, we want to have an open door policy. We want to have boundaries with folks, but we want kids to feel welcome. We want our home to be a place where people feel at rest, where people can be, where they can play, they can exist, and they can feel the love of God through that, right? So we're in the midst of just hearing you talk about that, of like trying to set that environment, trying to set that soil. What kind of set that trajectory for the career side of what you were doing and what you ended up studying? What kind of drew you towards that field and then ultimately to get your PhD? So what catalyzed that?
That is sort of an amazing story of which I cannot take any credit. I will say my dad was a scientist. He was a chemist by training. And so I've always had this sort of underpinning of science and wonder and curiosity. Both my mom and dad were deep readers and very curious about life, students of the world and of God through the scriptures. So with that predicate, I actually, when I was matriculating as a freshman to Biola, they asked, well, what major do you want to take? And I had no clue. And so I thought, well, pre-med sounds pretty good. So I put down pre-med. Well, the first day I show up to go meet my advisor to sort of line up my classes for my first year as a freshman, I noticed that they had connected me as an advisor with the chairwoman of the mathematics department. And I thought, ooh, that doesn't make sense to me. I was thinking life science, biology, chemistry, some physical science that would allow me then to move along my notion of being a pre-medical student there. But I went to meet this woman who became my second mother, basically. And within the span of 2 hours meeting with her that first day on campus, she said, Greg, you're good at math. You love medicine and helping people. You need to become a biostatistician. You need to get a PhD in biostatistics. So as a naive 18-year-old, I said, yes, ma'am. And that set the trajectory out of the blue for the next 8 years of my life and ultimately for where I am now.
A lot of what's amazing about that story is a lot of times, people show up and it is kind of this spin the wheel. What's something you might be interested in? Right. And then they switch majors 3, 4, 7 times. They switch careers 3, 4, 7 times and feel like they're wasting time, energy, money, all those things. And we have a process, our life mapping, especially for students, helps them kind of set that, trajectory, because it's something like somewhere around 18% of kids who study and get a major in a certain field, they'll only 18% of them will work a day in that field in their career, which is wild. But here you have someone saying, I see this in you. And you were like, I guess so.
That's right.
I do not hear that story where someone just kind of pegs it. But there's a power, we talk about all the time, those I see in you conversations. I see that you have this desire, this ability, this invitation, whether it's career or something else. That's really powerful.
Yeah, that's my story, and all glory to God for that.
That's amazing.
It's a gift I'll never forget.
That's amazing. So, okay, you've now gone down this path. You're getting your PhD. You've put in all this study and all this work. You end up in Indianapolis. Over the next, decades of your career and all that, what were some of those more what was a formative moment? What was a moment or season of life that really shaped your life and leadership, that helped to grow you up, mature you in different ways?
Growing up in Berkeley in that milieu I mentioned of Black power, being a white, growing minority with white flight setting in, and seeing what government intervention, well-intended sometimes, but what it did to destroy the fabric of a community. In particular, Berkeley was the first municipality in the nation to desegregate their schools via busing for a large municipality. And that's been written up in our former school superintendent's memoir, which I've read. And I saw what happened when you try to bus students together, calling it integration, and then as soon as they hit campus, they segregate themselves. And so we had a Black house for the Black kids in junior high, a Casa de la Raza for the Hispanic kids, and the white kids were left in the traditional school by and large. And I thought, even as a youngster, I thought, this doesn't make sense, because I lived in a racially integrated neighborhood. And I saw, though, sort of what had happened with, especially with the African-American population, poverty, broken families with all the legacy of slavery, loss of wealth, and then government trying to help out, but no real solutions there. And I was always burdened because as a white person who was called out, who was accosted for being a white person, I always had a sense that Jesus wanted more from all of us and so he really has led me to seek the human dignity of each person, regardless of their skin color.
Yeah.
So I've always had a heart for the poor and the oppressed that way, because in a more modest way, I experienced that. I experienced some of the trauma there, but not to the extent so many others around me did. And so when I came to Indy, as I had been involved with other before, I moved downtown Indianapolis, met a friend who was working with inner city kids in Indianapolis, started working with them. We found an old home down the old north side at 12th and Central. We purchased it together as two unmarried men at the time. We brought in other believing men to serve with us, and we gave them a below market rate renting house from us, saying, you got to serve with us in the community. If you do that, then you get below market financial lease terms. So we started working the inner city, hired kids from the hood, the neighborhood there was known as Dodge City at the time. And so that has led to now sort of an impetus with what I do is seeing human dignity restored through enterprise and seeing them really valued in life for what God has called them to do and be.
I think that's where, we talk about around here that sometimes these liminal kind of spaces or experiences, these things that we either see happening around us or that we ourselves go through, maybe some sort of pain, injustice, conflict, often shape kind of this broader purpose statement for our lives. And as believers, we always say, we should know that our purpose is to love God, love neighbor, make disciples. That's the macro purpose. But the micro of how we uniquely express that, what you just talked about there of, hey, here was my experience. Here was the experience I saw. There's got to be a better way for us to do this thing called life, right. And in a more integrative way in society. Can you just talk about that a little bit? Because I feel like, one, I didn't know that was your upbringing. It connects so many dots of knowing things that you've been in and around and involved with. But how does kind of having that kind of clarity of here's kind of a unique way for me in this season of life to express purpose, to express the Great Commission, what kind of path has that led you down in your life, man? Because, you have the career stuff in the backdrop, but there's a bunch of other things that you've been involved with, that you've helped get started, things like that. Can you just speak about that a little bit of that kind of magnet, of that pull to do this a different way?
Sure. Even though I grew up lower middle class in a lower class neighborhood, I am a person of privilege, huge privilege. My upbringing with my family, the experience I've had, the gifts that I've mentioned to you of people mentoring and pouring into me, and to whom much is given, much is required. So I've always had a sense of stewardship for the privilege and the talents and gifts and the weaknesses and the frailties that God has given me to allow me to express myself. In particular, I've always had a built-in sense of entrepreneurship. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. I remember trying to sell Christmas cards to my neighbors, as a young kid, and then selling subscriptions to the newspaper route that I had, just stuff like that. Yeah. So, co-founding the Oaks Academy as the founding board chair there, that's a long story. It was a gift to me. It was a wonderful thing, but I've always had a sense of entrepreneurial, take a risk, do what God has called you to be and do, given the experiences that you've had in life. And so even now, as I have helped co-found the Praxis Guild of Redemptive Entrepreneurs and that ecosystem here in the broader Indianapolis metro area, that's always a sense of, okay, I have been given, and I need to love my neighbor as I've received love myself. And that's the impetus behind what I do. My wife says that I'm working 3 times as hard now without making a penny. And I can understand that. She's been a precious soul by my side in all of this. And so I'm trying to not to be doing as much. Yes. But I'm still, I can't help myself. I'm a horrible golfer. So I can't say I'm retiring and going golfing. I have to go out and start and launch stuff.
And I've seen, maybe it's just something here in Indianapolis, but I feel like there's a lot of folks that I've met kind of in your age group that are starting to take that mentality to say, you know what, I tried to do the, traditional retirement thing for like a month or a year or 2 years, but I have more to give. I have more to pour back out. I have more to mentor. And yes, we want to pay attention to, the pace at which we're running and doing things, but also to say, hey, this is the day, this is the week, this is the month that I have to steward. How might I steward that well? And how might that be part of my worship, this week? And so I've been really encouraged, especially, on this side of things and kind of moving into this entrepreneurship stuff through launching this nonprofit. I've bumped into more and more people, many of whom all are connected back to you, which is great. But Greg, give us maybe through this whole broad journey that you've had, what's an everyday leadership principle that you've carried with you through it all?
Flip the script. At Eli Lilly, when I became an organizational leader, the first thing I did was take the org chart where my incumbent was at the top and everyone else was below. Yep. And I turned that thing on its head, and I put myself at the bottom, and all of my staff and their staff and the whole organization, I put at the top, within the customer, the ultimate customer, internal and external, at the very top there to serve them. And my management, when I shared the org chart with them, because, it has to be published and whatnot, I got a few glances like, Greg, what kind of crazy stuff are you up to here? But that is the leadership principle, is we're called to serve. Now, the notion of servant leadership gets a bad rap at times because it views someone as a wimp, as just sort of, I'm not. No, it demands a lot because you're at the root of this big tree. You're at the trunk of a tree, not just the branches. And so actually it demands even more of you to stand up, to lead by being in front and in back at the right time. So that is the leadership principle that I seek to embody and help to promulgate with others.
It's fun when there's kind of like those pivotal moments where you see the sandbox in which something comes to life, right? Of saying, hey, this is what servant leadership might look like, could look like, and then be able to take those principles and drip it into the other aspects of your life, volunteerism, involvement in the community, other new, leadership initiatives, all those kinds of things. I love that. Greg, what's one thing, we have a lot of our listeners are people who have, maybe started some sort of new work, a new ministry, a new nonprofit, or aspiring to do so. Many of whom are working they're seeking this journey of what does it mean to be an everyday leader, regardless of title? What does it mean to show up in my home? What does it mean to show up in my workplace? What does it mean to show up in my faith community? What does it mean to show up in my broader community with a posture of leadership? And in addition to what you just shared, what's maybe one everyday leadership principle that you would encourage our listeners with?
Well, we may need to argue a bit about this after the podcast, but apart from education and schools and more traditional things, what I always ask a person, especially if they're saying, I want to start a not-for-profit, is I say, why can't it be or shouldn't it be a for-profit? Start there. Yes. Because for-profit allows for ownership. And in our culture, we need less rent sinking and more ownership with equity. Yeah. And so we always start there. I don't disparage not-for-profits, but the leadership principle is think about what it takes to be a for-profit enterprise and do it in a way that honors God and honors the world. Yes. And then we can reverse engineer if necessary from there. Totally.
And I think that's something, in our Start Something workshop, as we help people start imagining things, is we don't have them tell us, am I going to be a business or nonprofit? Or we're like, we don't care. What's the thing you want to start? And then we can get to funding models. You can get to all those other pieces. What's the thing you want to do? What's the problem you're seeking to solve? And really starting with that, because I think a lot of people do get hung up on, well, maybe all I'm comfortable with is this being a nonprofit, or all I'm comfortable with is this being a for-profit. And in our story, it was like we ended up starting a for-profit consulting company called Switchback over here, to fund some of the things that we were going to do with Wayfinders over time and steward that well. And then that model kept coming back to, okay, yeah, we have some program revenue as a nonprofit, but yes, donors and how we're going to do this and how we're going to give things away demands that we stay Wayfinders as a nonprofit. Right. But I think going down that journey and saying, what should this be? What's a revenue model? Really pushes you. What's the idea? What's the problem to solve? And not getting, like you said, I think a lot of people have that similar thing where, hey, I want to start a nonprofit, but they don't know fundraising, they don't know grant making, they don't have that kind of connection. Right. And it's like, well, why does that feel more comfortable?
That's beautiful. I love that approach.
All right, Greg, I know that you came ready for this question. And if you don't know, Greg reads more books than anybody I personally know. But Greg, what is a book? What's a podcast that's impacted you recently? And then why would you say that?
Well, I read so many books, I can't parcel out one. But I did. What you're seeing here, Brandon, in front of you is I brought the 4 books that are currently on my table to read. One is by Ed Simon. It's called Heaven, Hell, and Paradise Lost. It's a man's current embodying of John Milton's famous work. I look forward to reading this because I love classical literature and I love appropriating that into the modern context. So Ed does that. The next book is called Statesmanship, Selections from Xenophon to Churchill by my friend Johnny Burtka, who runs ISI. It's been highly recommended. I want to read that book because I'm committed to breaking down this political partisanship that we see now. And as I tell people, don't talk to me about federal elections until you're showing me how you're loving your neighbor as you love yourself. And that's sort of where we need to land is locally, how are we loving our neighbor? The next one is T.S. Eliot, Culture and Anarchy. I love T.S. Eliot and his, again, classical work. And again, the notion of what he says and speaks into our modern cultural context and anarchism. And the last one is, I love history. Eric Klein has written this book called After 1177 BC, The Survival of Civilizations. I know nothing about what happened after 1177 BC, so I can't wait to dig into that.
Oh, man. Now, I will just tell you, Greg legitimately puts out a list at the end of every year. Am I right?
Yes.
I've gotten it the last couple of years.
That's right.
And I always pick a couple of books off of there. I don't read all of them because Greg's already read them for me, so I can get his notes. But man, it's just you are a very curious, consistent learner and always posture yourself in that way. And I love what you just shared. So if you're interested in some good summer reads, this might be some of the things to maybe pick up, or to maybe you'll look at these and maybe Greg will as well and say, well, there's some good parts of these and there's some parts that I don't love too, which is the journey of reading as well. Greg, how do people, how do people find you, get involved with some of the things that you're doing? Obviously the new Polk Stables co-hatch location just opened up this summer. How do people learn about that? Citizen 7, some of the other things, Praxis, how do people get connected?
Right. So there are a couple of websites. Citizen7indy.org has, you can reach our office there as we bring men together in brotherly affection to serve and love Metro Indianapolis together. And that's one way. Our Praxis Guild has a website as well. You can Google that. And
we'll link to all that stuff in the show notes.
So those are 2 primary ways right now to connect with me and my partners as we scale these initiatives.
I love it. And I have, not just me, but also our kind of collective work here at Wayfinders has benefited. In particular, this Praxis Fellowship and in the retreat that we went, on in April, which was just amazing and so life-giving. So many people taking a fresh look at what you're building and what's kind of next and speaking life into that has been such a powerful, robust community to be in. And, it's just amazing. You experience this ethos of care, generosity, and love through people like Greg and others. And so I just want to say thank you for that. Thank you for you and others who've said yes to starting these courageous things, because years before, as this conviction was growing over the years, seeing stories in that beautiful mosaic as people kind of come together, learn from each other, learn with each other, I have really benefited from. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome, Brandon. You mentioned our newest co-working space, Co-Hatch Polk Stables in downtown Indianapolis. Would love for people to come visit that, because all that we're talking about here is is animated. You feel it there, and we'd love to bring people in and explore possibilities about being there for events, for co-working, things like that. I would note that Joanna Taft and the Harrison Center for the Arts has put in this beautiful event space, which is called Folklore, which honors the African-American history of the Martindale-Brightwood neighborhood, the dairy industry, of which we've rehabbed an old dairy stables building. And so that's served my current embodiment of all that I am.
And that place that Joanna's worked on, the Folklore Museum, if you will, it's so cool because you can literally scan, not to spoil it, but like you can scan items on the wall and either audio or video pops up and it tells you the history of all these beautiful things right from that community, right there.
Yes.
And I was just blown away. I was just blown away with some of the stories. And every time you go down there, you can scan something new, learn something new. Just a really, like you said, I think it's a beautiful culmination of the things that you're passionate about. And it's very tangible. You know, you can kind of feel it in the air as you go down there. And it's a beautiful space to be in. So if you're looking for a space downtown Indianapolis, or you're just looking to kind of venture out and have kind of a new environment, it's a great space to be in at the new co-hatch at Polk Stables.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Greg, I want to say thank you for hanging out with us. Thank you for taking time to spend some time with me today. Tell your story. I'm encouraged by it. I know others will as well. And I want to say thank you to all of you listeners for tuning into this episode of the For Everyday Leaders podcast by Wayfinders. We hope it helps you lead in the everyday spaces and moments of your life. Thank you,
Brendan.
Greg.
My pleasure. God bless.